The text message from my wife's phone lit up my workshop table like a neon sign advertising my own stupidity. Can't wait to feel you inside me again tonight, baby. Nate's working late as usual. The perfect fool. I stared at those words until they burned into my retinas, my hands shaking as I held Ellie's phone. She'd left it charging in my garage while she showered, probably never imagining her husband of 12 years would finally grow a backbone. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Nate Bell, and I fix broken things for a living. Air conditioners, furnaces, people's comfort systems. Turns out I'm pretty good at it, except when it comes to fixing my own life. I'm 38, built like a linebacker who discovered beer, and apparently married to a woman who thinks I'm the punchline to some cosmic joke. The phone buzzed again. Another message from Mason H. Mason Hart, the mortgage broker who'd been coming to our barbecues for 3 years, slapping my back and calling me buddy, while apparently planning to screw my wife behind my back. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd installed his new HVAC system just last month, working in his bedroom while he was probably texting Ellie about their next rendezvous. Honey, have you seen my phone? Ellie's voice drifted from upstairs, sweet as poisoned honey. I cleared the message history and set the phone back on the charger. It's down here charging, babe. She appeared in the garage doorway moments later, hair still damp from her shower, wearing that silk robe I'd bought her for Christmas. Looking at her now, I wondered how I'd missed the signs. The late nights at client meetings, the new lingerie that never seemed to make an appearance in our bedroom, the way she'd started password protecting everything. Thanks, she said, grabbing the phone without looking at me. I'm meeting Tessa for drinks tonight. Don't wait up. Tessa Morrison, her best friend since college. Another piece of this puzzle I was just starting to solve. Sure thing, have fun. After Ellie left, I cracked open a beer and called my buddy Pete Kowalski. Pete runs his own HVAC business too, and he's the only guy I know who understands that sometimes the best solutions come from the most unexpected places. You sound like hell, Pete said when he answered. I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. 20 minutes later, Pete was sitting in my garage, shaking his head. Jesus, Nate, how long has this been going on? Based on what I saw on her phone, at least 6 months, maybe longer. I took a long pull from my beer. They're meeting tonight, some hotel downtown. You gonna confront her? Eventually. But first, I'm going to do what I do best. Which is? I smiled for the first time in hours. Fix something that's broken, starting with my marriage. The next morning, I woke up to find Ellie already gone. A note on the kitchen counter said she had an early showing. I knew better now. She was probably having breakfast with Mason, planning their next move in this game where I'd been the unwitting third player. I'd spent most of the night thinking, planning. Ellie had a big open house this weekend, some luxury condo downtown that she'd been bragging about for weeks. She'd invited half the town, including Mason, of course. It was going to be the perfect opportunity for what I had in mind. First, I needed more information. I drove to Mason's office building and parked across the street, feeling like a character in one of those detective novels Ellie used to read. I didn't have to wait long. At 10:30 a.m., Mason's silver BMW pulled out of the parking garage with Ellie in the passenger seat. They drove to the Marriott on 5th Street. I followed at a distance, watched them check in together, and took photos with my phone. Not because I planned to use them in court. I had something better in mind. I wanted documentation for my own peace of mind, proof that I wasn't losing my sanity. They emerged 2 hours later, Ellie looking disheveled in a way that made my stomach turn. Mason had his hand on her lower back as they walked to his car, the same proprietary gesture he'd probably seen me make 1,000 times. That afternoon, I started making calls. First to Jerry Hutchins, who ran the local Facebook community group, then to Sarah Chen, who wrote the society column for the weekly paper. Finally, to my cousin Danny, who worked as a bartender at the hotel where Ellie's open house was being held. I need a favor, I told each of them. And trust me, you're going to want to be there for this. Saturday arrived gray and drizzly. Perfect weather for what I had planned. I dressed carefully, my best jeans, the button-down shirt Ellie had bought me, and my work boots polished to a shine. I wanted to look respectable when I crashed her party. The open house was in full swing when I arrived. The luxury condo was packed with potential buyers, local real estate agents, and social climbers looking for free champagne and gossip. Ellie had outdone herself with the staging, fresh flowers, soft jazz, and enough alcohol to loosen tongues and wallets. I spotted Mason immediately, holding court near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his arm casually draped around Ellie's waist. She was laughing at something he'd said. her head thrown back in that way that used to be reserved for me. "Nate!" Tessa Morrison appeared at my elbow, her smile too bright, too surprised. "I didn't know you were coming." "Wouldn't miss it," I said, accepting a glass of wine from a passing server. "Ellie's been working so hard on this. I wanted to show my support." I made small talk for 20 minutes, working my way through the crowd, positioning myself near the kitchen where I could hear Mason and Ellie talking in low voices. "After this wraps up, we could go back to your place," Mason was saying. "Nate's probably passed out in front of the TV by now." Ellie giggled. "He's so predictable. I swear sometimes I think he wouldn't notice if I moved out entirely." "Maybe you should," Mason replied. "I've got plenty of room at my place." That's when I made my move. "Mason," I called out loudly, stepping into the kitchen with my wine glass raised. "There's the man of the hour. I was just telling everyone about the amazing work you did on our refinancing." Mason's face went pale, but he recovered quickly. "Nate, buddy, great to see you here supporting Ellie." "Oh, I always support my wife," I said, my voice carrying just enough to draw attention from the nearby guests. "In fact, I was thinking we should have you over for dinner soon. You know, to properly thank you for all the personal attention you've been giving our family." The kitchen had gone quiet. Ellie was staring at me with wide eyes, probably trying to figure out if I knew what I was implying. "That's very generous," Mason said carefully. "Not at all." I raised my voice another notch. "I mean, when a man goes above and beyond the call of duty, spending so much time with a client's wife, taking her to hotels for business meetings, well, that deserves recognition, don't you think?" The silence in the kitchen was deafening. I could see other guests starting to turn our way, sensing drama like sharks. "Nate," Ellie hissed, "what are you doing?" "I'm being grateful, honey. Mason here has been so attentive to your needs. All those late-night calls, those lunch meetings at the Marriott." I paused, letting the implications sink in. "I just think everyone should know what kind of full-service mortgage broker they're dealing with." Mason's face was now bright red. "I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, pulling out my phone. "In fact, I have photos that show just how well I understand." That's when Mason lunged for my phone and I stepped backward, directly into the server carrying a tray of red wine. The crash was spectacular, glass shattering, wine spraying across Mason's expensive suit, and me stumbling backward into the granite countertop. The entire open house turned to stare as Mason stood there, dripping wine and fury, while I picked myself up with an apologetic smile. "Sorry about that, folks," I announced to the crowd. "Just a little accident, though I guess some stains are harder to wash out than others." The crowd began to murmur, phones appearing as people started taking photos and videos. Ellie looked mortified, Mason looked murderous, and I felt better than I had in months. "You son of a jerk," Mason snarled, stepping toward me. Now, I said, backing toward the living room where more guests could hear. "No need for language like that. We're all adults here. Well, most of us are." That's when Tessa Morrison stepped forward, her face flushed with wine and something that looked like guilt. "Stop it, both of you," she said. "This is ridiculous." "You're right, Tessa," I said. "It is ridiculous. Almost as ridiculous as Mason thinking he could juggle my wife and his other girlfriends without anyone noticing." Tessa went white. Mason's mouth fell open. And Ellie? Ellie looked like I'd just slapped her. "What other girlfriends?" Ellie whispered. I smiled, pulling out my phone again. "Well, there's the photos I took of Mason's car at the Riverside Motel last Tuesday, and the credit card receipts I found in his trash. Turns out he's not very careful about disposal. But my personal favorite is the recording I made of him bragging to his buddies at Murphy's Bar about his stable of desperate housewives." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. I could see Jerry Hutchins frantically typing on his phone, probably updating the community Facebook page in real time. "You're lying," Mason said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I?" I scrolled through my phone, finding the audio file I'd recorded 3 nights ago when I'd followed Mason to his regular hangout. Should I play it for everyone? I think they'd be particularly interested in the part where you describe Ellie as good for a quick fix, but too clingy for anything serious. Ellie made a sound like a wounded animal. Mason took another step toward me, his fists clenched, but Pete Kowalski appeared at my shoulder like a guardian angel. "Problem here, Nate?" Pete asked mildly, but his presence changed the dynamic immediately. Pete's built like a brick wall and has the kind of reputation that makes smart men think twice. "No problem at all," I said. "Just clearing the air. Speaking of which, Mason, you might want to get that suit to the dry cleaner quickly. Red wine stains are murder to get out. Almost as hard as getting rid of a bad reputation." I turned to address the crowd, most of whom were still recording with their phones. Sorry for the disruption, folks. The condo really is beautiful, and my wife has done an amazing job with the staging, though I'd recommend being careful about the mortgage broker you choose. Some of them offer services that aren't exactly professional. With that, I walked through the stunned crowd and out the door, Pete following behind me. As we reached the elevator, I could hear shouting from the condo, Ellie's voice rising above Mason's, both of them trying to salvage a situation that was already beyond repair. Feel better? Pete asked as we waited for the elevator. Getting there, I said, but I'm not done yet. The elevator doors opened and we stepped inside. As they closed, I could hear more shouting from down the hall, and I knew that by tomorrow everyone in town would know exactly what kind of man Mason Hart really was, and exactly what kind of wife I'd been married to. The joke, it seemed, was finally on them, but I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. Monday morning brought the consequences I'd been expecting. Ellie had spent the weekend at Tessa's house, sending me a series of increasingly frantic text messages that ranged from denial to anger to desperate bargaining. Mason had apparently gone radio silent, which told me everything I needed to know about his character. I was in my workshop rebuilding a compressor motor when my phone rang. Ellie's boss, Margaret Landry, had a voice like gravel and a reputation for not tolerating drama in her real estate office. Nate, we need to talk. I'm listening, Mrs. Landry. This weekend's incident has caused some problems. The video is all over social media, and it's reflecting poorly on the agency. I'm going to have to suspend Ellie pending an investigation. I felt a twinge of something. Not quite guilt, but close. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you orchestrated this whole thing. I just told the truth, Mrs. Landry. If that's caused problems, maybe you should ask yourself why. There was a long pause. Ellie wants to talk to you. She's here in my office. Put her on. Nate? Ellie's voice was small, defeated. Can we please talk? Face to face? I think we're past talking, Ellie. Please. I know I screwed up, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, start over. Some things can't be fixed, I said. Trust me, I'm an expert on broken things. I hung up and went back to my compressor motor, but my hands were shaking and I couldn't focus on the delicate work. 12 years of marriage don't end easily, even when they should. That evening, Pete stopped by with a six-pack and a grim expression. You need to see this, he said, pulling out his phone. Mason's fighting back. He showed me a Facebook post from Mason's account, a long, rambling defense that painted me as an unstable, jealous husband who'd sabotaged an innocent business relationship. He'd managed to spin the whole thing as my fault, claiming that Ellie had come to him for help dealing with my increasingly erratic behavior. Son of a jerk, I muttered. Gets worse, Pete said, scrolling down. Look at the comments. A surprising number of people were buying Mason's story. People who'd known me for years were suddenly questioning my mental state, my version of events. Mason had always been charming, and apparently that charm extended to social media damage control. What are you going to do? Pete asked. I smiled, feeling that familiar calm that came when I had a plan. Then I'm going to give them something they can't spin. The next morning, I drove to the courthouse and filed for divorce. Then I went to Mason's office building and waited. I didn't have to wait long. At 11:30, Mason emerged from the parking garage, probably heading to lunch. I followed him to the upscale bistro where he apparently conducted a lot of his business meetings. I watched him settle into a corner booth with a woman I didn't recognize. Blonde, expensive-looking, wearing a wedding ring that definitely didn't match Mason's. I took photos, then walked into the restaurant. Mason, I called out cheerfully, approaching his table. Fancy meeting you here? The woman looked confused. Mason looked trapped. Nate, he said carefully. This is unexpected. I'll bet. I turned to the woman with my friendliest smile. I'm Nate Bell. Mason here has been having an affair with my wife. I don't suppose you're married too? The woman's face went through several interesting color changes. Excuse me? Oh, you didn't know about Ellie, my wife? They've been meeting at hotels for months. I have photos if you're interested. What is wrong with you? Mason hissed, half rising from his seat. Nothing that a good divorce attorney can't fix, I replied. Though I'm guessing your friend here might need one too, depending on what her husband thinks about lunch dates with known cheaters. The woman grabbed her purse and fled without another word. Mason sat back down heavily, his face red with anger and embarrassment. You're destroying my business, he said. Good, I replied. Maybe next time you'll think twice before screwing another man's wife. I left him sitting there alone and drove home, feeling lighter than I had in days. But I wasn't done yet. Not even close. That afternoon, I got a call from Danny, my cousin who bartended at the hotel. "You're not going to believe this," he said. "Mason just checked in with some woman. Not your wife. Paid cash, used a fake name, but I recognized him from the photos you showed me." "Which room?" 314. "But Nate, you're not thinking of doing anything stupid, are you?" "Define stupid," I said, and hung up. An hour later, I was in the hotel parking lot with Pete and a plan that was either brilliant or completely insane. Probably both. "This is a bad idea," Pete said for the third time. "All the best ideas are bad ideas," I replied, pulling on latex gloves. "That's what makes them memorable." We took the service elevator to the third floor, Pete keeping watch while I worked on the door to room 314. 12 years of fixing locks had taught me a few things about opening them, too. The room was empty. Mason and his companion were probably at dinner. I worked quickly, setting up my surprise in the bathroom, the closet, and under the bed. Nothing dangerous, nothing illegal, just a few modifications that would make their evening unforgettable. "Done," I whispered to Pete, and we slipped out as quietly as we'd entered. We were having coffee at the diner across the street when the fire trucks arrived an hour later. Not because of any actual fire, of course, but because the smoke detectors in room 314 had been triggered by the harmless but spectacularly smelly smoke bombs I'd rigged to go off when the bathroom light was turned on. Through the diner window, we watched Mason and a woman in hotel bathrobes being escorted out of the building by firefighters, both of them covered in the bright purple dye I'd mixed with the smoke. The woman was crying, Mason was shouting at anyone who would listen, and hotel security was taking photos for their incident report. "Jesus Christ, Nate," Pete said, trying not to laugh. "You've lost your mind." "Maybe," I admitted, but I found my sense of humor. My phone buzzed with a text from Danny. "Hotel manager says they're banned for life. Woman's husband just showed up. This is better than cable TV." I watched Mason trying to explain the situation to what was presumably the other woman's very large, very angry husband, and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The joke was definitely on him now. But I still wasn't finished. The final act came 3 days later, at the town's monthly business association meeting. Mason had the balls to show up, probably trying to salvage what was left of his reputation. I'd been waiting for this opportunity. The meeting was held in the community center, with about 50 local business owners in attendance. I waited until the open comment period, then stood up. "I'd like to address some recent rumors," I announced, my voice carrying clearly through the room. "There's been some confusion about my marriage, and I think everyone deserves to hear the truth." Mason tried to interrupt, but the association president waved him down. "For the past 6 months," I continued, "Mason Hart has been having an affair with my wife. I have documentation, photographs, and recordings that prove this beyond any doubt. I'm not sharing this information to embarrass anyone, well, not primarily, but because I think this community deserves to know what kind of man they're doing business with." I pulled out a folder thick with evidence, printouts of text messages, photos of Mason and Ellie together, credit card receipts, hotel records that Danny had helped me obtain. Mason has also been conducting affairs with at least 3 other married women in this town. I have their names, if anyone's interested. He's been using his position as a mortgage broker to target vulnerable women going through divorces or financial difficulties. The room was silent. Mason had gone white as a sheet. "This is slander," he managed to say. "No," I replied calmly. "Slander is spoken. This is libel, and it's only libel if it's not true. Would you like me to play the recording of you bragging about your conquests?" I held up my phone, and Mason shrank back in his chair. "The point is," I continued, addressing the room, "we all have to make choices about who we do business with, who we trust, who we let into our lives. I trusted Mason Hart with my financial information, welcomed him into my home, considered him a friend. He repaid that trust by systematically destroying my marriage." I turned to look directly at Mason. "But here's the thing about trust. Once it's broken, it can't be fixed. And here's the thing about reputations. They take years to build and seconds to destroy. Mason Hart destroyed mine when he seduced my wife. Now I'm returning the favor." I sat down to absolute silence. The association president cleared his throat awkwardly and moved on to the next agenda item, but nobody was paying attention. All eyes were on Mason, who looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. After the meeting, I was approached by 3 different women who quietly thanked me for speaking up. Apparently, Mason's behavior was an open secret among certain circles, but nobody had been willing to confront him directly. "My sister almost fell for his act," one woman told me. "Thank God her divorce was finalized before she got too involved." I drove home that night feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not happiness exactly, but the calm satisfaction that comes from a job well done. Ellie was waiting for me in the driveway, sitting on the porch steps with a suitcase beside her. I came to get the rest of my things, she said without looking up. They're in boxes in the garage, I replied. I figured you'd be by eventually. We loaded her car in silence, 12 years of shared life reduced to a few boxes and suitcases. When we were done, she turned to face me. I'm sorry, she said, for all of it. You didn't deserve what I did. No, I agreed. I didn't. Mason says you've ruined his life. I laughed, surprising both of us. Mason ruined his own life. I just made sure everyone else knew about it. What happens now? Now you figure out how to live with the choices you made, I said. And I do the same. She got in her car and drove away, and I never saw her again. 6 months later, I got a call from Pete. You need to see the paper, he said. The headline read, Local Mortgage Broker Loses License Following Ethics Investigation. The article detailed how Mason Hart had been stripped of his professional credentials after multiple complaints about unethical conduct, including using his position to exploit vulnerable clients. Apparently, my public accusations had prompted several other women to come forward with their own stories. Mason's business had collapsed, his marriage had ended, and he'd left town under a cloud of scandal that would follow him wherever he went. The article quoted the state licensing board. Mr. Hart's conduct represents a fundamental breach of professional ethics and public trust. His actions have brought discredit to the entire mortgage industry. I cut out the article and pinned it to the bulletin board in my workshop, right next to my business license and a photo of the new truck I'd bought with the money from Ellie's half of the house. The joke, it turned out, had been on me for years, but now it was finally on them, and that felt like justice. Some things can't be fixed, but they can be replaced with something better. I was learning that lesson every day, one repair at a time, one laugh at a time, one small victory at a time. And for the first time in years, I was looking forward to tomorrow.